Abracadabra, my family. It's your girl T, aka the nappy headed jojoba, and today we are talking intermittent fasting. It's been all the rage on the YouTubes this year, especially in the past 6 to 8 months. I've been aware of intermittent fasting for well over 5 years. I remember Jimmy Kimmel was an intermittent faster. I don't know if he still is. And I remember he was doing it back in the day. And I think he was doing the version where you fast like 2 or 3 days out of the week and then you eat normally the other days. There's a few different modules of intermittent fasting that exist. There's a version where you eat normally a certain number of days per week and then you fast or have extremely restricted calories 2 to 3 days of the week. By extremely restricted, I would say under 500 calories seems to be the norm. However, that is not fasting. That's just restricting calories. Nonetheless, this tends to get lumped in with the intermittent fasting protocols. There's also the 16-8, which is probably the most used and most well-known because it is also the most accessible, wherein you fast for 16 hours of the day and you have an 8-hour eating window. And then there are other versions like the warrior diet and things like that, OMAD. So there's a few different ways that you can approach intermittent fasting, but I started experimenting with intermittent fasting, I would say in July of this year, 2018. I don't have a specific start date, and I'll get into why that is a bit later, but at this point, I think it's safe to say that I've been intermittent fasting for a solid 3 months, and I was waiting until I felt like I had a really good handle on my experience with it before I wanted to film any videos about it so I could be a little bit more comprehensive when I share my thoughts with you guys. My ride or dies already know that your girl likes to be thorough, so I don't like to launch into talking about things when I don't feel equipped to talk about them properly. At the moment, intermittent fasting has somehow become almost synonymous with the ketogenic diet. Without getting too deep into it, I have zero interest in keto and I will not be doing keto now or ever. Long story short, I don't consider it to be a necessarily sustainable way to eat. It's also very challenging based on what I've seen to create meals for yourself that have proper nutrition. I don't really want to go through the expense of consulting with a nutritionist or dietitian just to make sure that I'm, making sure I'm hitting those macros correctly while still getting my adequate nutrition, because what I tend to see is people eating a metric fuck ton of bacon and cheese, and because that's still keto, they think that that's good for them. Obviously, that's an absurd way to approach nutrition, and I can't believe it's gotten as popular as it has, but then again, stranger things have happened, and I shouldn't be surprised at all. In my opinion, the ketogenic diet is not sustainable long term, not just from a health standpoint of the bacon and cheese factor, but in terms of people who are doing the diet almost constantly complaining when they're around people who are not on keto and how, oh, must be nice to eat this, must be nice to eat that. If you're this miserable in your diet, you're never going to be able to stick with it. I don't think that it's realistic for me to go the rest of my life without having more than 20 grams of carbs a day. I say this in all of my fitness and nutrition related videos that my goal is to always only incorporate things that I see myself being able to do long term. And that was what piqued my interest in intermittent fasting, because it seemed like it would work very well with my natural eating patterns, and as well it would allow me to experience the benefits of ketosis without having to do anything as what I consider to be extreme and somewhat ridiculous as the ketogenic diet. I think the ketogenic diet does have a place for some people. I know that it was actually originally developed to help people with epilepsy, I believe, but now it's just become a very trendy version of basically Atkins 2.0, and quite frankly, I'm just kind of sick of hearing about it personally. But yeah, it's very popular right now, and it often goes hand in hand with intermittent fasting. I'm only interested in intermittent fasting. After looking more into intermittent fasting, I think that if you are going to pick one, and it seems that most people don't, most people do keto and intermittent fasting, which is completely unnecessary unless you want to do both. But either way, what I liked about intermittent fasting was how many versions there are of it so that you can really kind of tailor it to your personal preferences and needs. And as well, intermittent fasting is compatible with any diet. When I say diet, I mean whatever it is that you eat. What you eat is your diet. I don't mean diet in the sense of like a crash diet like keto or the grapefruit diet or anything like that. So as I said earlier, I started intermittent fasting sometime in July of this year. I know it was either July or very, very early August. It's hard to say exactly because I naturally do not have a massive appetite in the mornings. Typically, whenever I would eat breakfast on a consistent basis, it was because I felt like I was supposed to, and because I was trying to make sure that I was adhering to the best practices in terms of fat loss for whatever I was doing at that time. It's actually a fairly archaic way of thinking, the whole idea of like, oh, you need to eat every 2 to 3 hours to keep your metabolism going and yada, yada, yada. That's not necessarily the case. It's also not necessarily what is most effective for most people, if not all people. My pursuit is fat loss, and because of that, intermittent fasting appealed to me because it would allow me to get into ketosis without having to do any weird diets. It was compatible with the way I already like to eat, and it's compatible with the way anybody likes to eat, really. It's more about changing when you eat to control your insulin levels throughout the day rather than worrying about eating this and not eating that. It's more about eating then, but not then. Because intermittent fasting restricts the number of hours in a day that you can smash food into your face, it helps to maximize the number of hours in the day at which your insulin levels are at baseline, which allows you to not store fat. Insulin is a fat-storing hormone. So when your insulin levels are down, your body is able to burn body fat instead of storing it. When I started off with my intermittent fasting, I was doing the 16-8, which I would surmise is the most popular intermittent fasting module. I'm not entirely certain, but because it's so approachable, I feel like that's what most people do, or at least where they start. And let me tell you guys, there was an adjustment period. Even though I generally don't naturally get hungry until sometime in the afternoon, usually around 1 or 2 p.m., it was still a little bit of an adjustment, mainly because of my energy levels. So when I started, I was eating between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. That was my 8-hour eating window. And it was actually very easy for me to get to that point of the day where I was allowed to eat at 2 p.m. I wasn't white knuckling it or feeling like I was super hungry. The adjustment period came for me when my body was first learning to become fat adapted. What that means is your body is actually in ketosis and it's actually using body fat as fuel instead of relying on glucose or glycogen stores. And because I was making sure that the most active portion of my day was still within my fasting window, it was very challenging for me in the beginning because I just felt so tired. So my workouts were definitely not at their best. I was relying on caffeine, just black coffee to help me a little bit there. But that definitely got me through. And at this point, I haven't had caffeine. I think I've had maybe one coffee in the past month or so. And it was just because I felt like having it. It wasn't because I needed it. But the fatigue level in those first few weeks was on 10. I gotta tell you, I honestly was just like, am I pregnant? Why am I this tired? After about 3 weeks, I feel like my body finally started to understand, oh, I get it. You're depriving us of glucose. Let's start burning that body fat. Meaning my body had actually become fat adapted. Once I felt very comfortable in my routine of 16-8, I gradually started reducing my eating window to the point where now, rather than 16-8, I tend to do either 18-6 or 19-5, meaning I fast for 18 or 19 hours of the day and eat or have an eating window. I'm not eating for 6 hours straight, but I have an eating window of between 5 and 6 hours. It is not set in stone, which is why I say I use both. It really depends on how I'm feeling that day, what my schedule is like, what activities I'm going to be doing, where I'm going to be going, things like that. But generally my eating window opens up at 4 p.m. and I will close it at 10 p.m. roughly. Again, it's not like I'm mean mugging the clock like, okay, it's 3:59, I can eat in 1 minute. It's very, very fluid and I'm not rigid. If I feel like I'm still very hungry at 9:45 and I need to eat again before I close my window for the night, I will extend it longer because I don't want to be famished the next day. It is more challenging for me to get to that 4 p.m. eating window certain days. There are some days where I just feel really hungry and I'm really ready for my window to open up earlier. And some days I do open it up earlier. I'll just eat at 3 or 3:30 or whatever the case may be, whatever I need to do. I'm definitely not rigid about it. But my energy levels have stabilized. My body is used to being in ketosis and it can go in and out whenever I'm, fasting pretty easily. When I wake up in the morning, my energy is good. I'm able to start my day. I'm actually getting up earlier in the morning lately, which I think is largely because I'm currently doing Whole30. I'm in my final week of it, and that will be the next She Tried It. So I'll talk more about that in that video. But the point is my body is definitely fat adapted and efficient at relying on body fat for energy throughout the day up until my eating window opens. But let's get to the juice. Let's get to the good stuff and talk about if and how my body has changed at all since embarking on this intermittent fasting journey, as well as whether I think I'm going to continue doing this. I definitely feel that my body has changed. I don't have a number of pounds lost or anything like that because, for one, like I said, I don't even know exactly what day I started doing this. I just transitioned into it naturally, since I generally don't get hungry until around lunchtime, late lunchtime, really. I just started letting myself skip breakfast, and I made sure that I would cut off my eating within 8 hours of my first meal. And that has since transitioned into a little bit more of a structured way of doing it where I have a 5 to 6 hour eating window. So I'm not exactly sure how many pounds I've lost or anything, but I did start doing this whilst I was still doing the Cut program by Natasha Ossian. And I did do that on my last She Tried It. I did review it, so I can link that here if you would like to check it out. So unfortunately, I don't really have like a starting weight or starting photos specific to how long I've been doing intermittent fasting, but you can see how my body has changed in the past several weeks or the past couple of months. And here's just some video of how I'm looking right now. I took this right before I sat down to film this talking part. So I should point out that I am injured right now. I've got 3 old injuries that are ruining my life at the moment, and I have not been able to go to the gym more than twice a week. And even when I do go, my workouts have been ain't shit workouts because all I can do is very minimal stuff, focusing on trying to rehabilitate and stabilize my body. So effectively, my workout routine has been non-existent, so I don't have a ton of definition right now, but you can see that I'm actually smaller. At least I feel that I've gotten smaller and I have lost some body fat. I feel like the shape of my legs looks different when I actually look at them in shorts in the mirror and things like that. There is more of a distinction between where my butt stops and where my legs begin, which has always been a challenge for me because my legs are so big. It was always just sort of like one unit from my hips down. But I should mention these results have been extremely gradual, compounded and exacerbated by the fact that I can't really work out right now. I always say what you eat is far more important than what you do in the gym. Diet is 90% at least of how big or small you are. The actual, tone and fitness of your body is determined in the gym, but your overall size is 100% determined by what you're putting in here. That could be interpreted poorly. But I say all of that to say that I really had to make sure that I was being patient and didn't give up on intermittent fasting because I do think that it's been effective for me. But I say all of that to say, fat loss is not linear. The idea that you should be losing 1 to 2 to 3 pounds a week steadily is folly. I mean, that may happen for a while, especially if you're a newbie and you're just embarking on a health and fitness journey. But realistically, in my experience, and I've been at this a pretty long time, I've been battling my weight since I was a teenager, and I only feel like I've gotten it under control in recent years, although I'm still not at my goal. But my point is, weight loss, it'll be flatlining for a while, and then I drop, and then I'll flatline for a while, and then I drop. And notice when I move my finger, it's not like that. It's not a huge drop. I find that I just kind of have to stick with things and see if they work. And as long as I'm not gaining, I generally will see success with it. When I started with intermittent fasting, I was within range of my stuck point, or the set point they sometimes call it, which tends to be where your body likes to stay when you aren't trying that hard and you're living relatively comfortably. So I was working out regularly. My nutrition was pretty good. I was allowing myself to have treat days once or twice a week. Really more like once, but you get my point. And even with that, it wasn't like I started intermittent fasting and the weight just started falling off of me. No, it was definitely a process, and that process is continuing. But I do feel that I made the right choice for me in terms of choosing this route to incorporate a more strategic approach to fat loss into my lifestyle. I feel like intermittent fasting has been very compatible with my lifestyle, and of course, like I said, it's compatible with my diet because it's compatible with any diet. And I absolutely have no plans to discontinue fasting at all because of the way our world is now, the modern world, with things like convenience foods and agriculture and so on and so forth, dollar menus. There is a food abundance. Quite frankly, anything that you can get from like a Taco Bell or a McDonald's, I don't even consider that food. Point is, food is abundant in a way that it never was when we were first brought onto this earth. Mankind has not evolved to keep up with the amount of food that is available to us. So having to learn to survive through periods where you do not have food available to you is more natural than having food available to you every 2 to 3 hours, in my opinion. So it makes sense to me to get more in touch with a way of eating that's even more archaic than that bodybuilder every 3 hour style. More archaic in the sense that this is what our ancestors did when they had to hunt and forage for every morsel. This is why obesity was not an issue for cavemen. And therefore, I will definitely be continuing with intermittent fasting. I have no foreseeable plans to discontinue it. It works for me. I like it. I enjoy that it gives me a feeling of freedom in terms of even when I do have treats in my diet. I feel like because my eating window is small enough, it also mitigates how much damage I can possibly do. Like, I only have so many hours to completely ruin my week. And that's it. I'm going to make sure I link some channels in the description box of resources right here on YouTube that I found very helpful for me when I was figuring out my strategy and approach for my intermittent fasting and just researching how it all works and what to do, what not to do. Because Fledged Fitness, Gravity Transformation, those are two channels that I really love. A lot of science-backed information on both of them. And then there's a couple others that are really good. So I will leave those linked in the description box. Make sure you check them out if you're considering intermittent fasting. It's not something that I would recommend that you just jump into because it does require a little bit of education so you can be strategic and not set yourself up for failure. That's it for this one. I hope this was helpful, and that's it. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.
That's some nappy-headed hose there, I'm going to tell you that now.